You wake before alarms, already scanning the day for possible fractures. You move through routines quietly, noticing exits, tones, and sudden shifts. You've learned to read rooms faster than reading messages on your phone. Somewhere along the way, you stopped matching other people's emotional timing, not because you wanted distance, but because your pace no longer matched theirs. People sometimes call you strong, or distant, or strangely calm under pressure. What they don't see is how often your steadiness gets misunderstood as ease, or how survival skills can look like personality from the outside. But here's the twist. What looks like resilience is often a nervous system rewritten by necessity. When life demands endurance long enough, perception itself quietly reorganizes. Studies suggest prolonged stress reshapes attention, memory, and emotional filtering. Yet few conversations linger on people who adapted without ever being repaired. This is about those who kept functioning while something fundamental kept shifting. This is about you if you've been through more than most people realize. 1. Survival minus oriented mindset. Yuri often told you're impractical grounded or unusually prepared for chaos. People assume it's temperament or intelligence or some admirable discipline. But that explanation misses something quieter and far less intentional. When survival becomes the priority, thinking stops being optional or expressive. Decisions narrow toward what reduces risk, preserves energy, and avoids collapse. This isn't pessimism, it's cognition shaped by repeated necessity. Psychology sometimes calls this survival mode or adaptive cognition, not as labels, but as patterns that emerge under sustained pressure. Your mind learns to scan faster, plan smaller, and commit cautiously. You notice how you rarely dream expansively without checking feasibility first. Even hope passes through an internal filter before being allowed space. This doesn't happen because you lack imagination. It happens because imagination once carried consequences you couldn't afford. Not everyone who suffers develops this mindset, and not all of it remains permanent. But when it forms, it quietly guides choices long after danger fades. You may wonder which parts of your thinking are protection and which are preference. 2. Emotional endurance without numbness. People assume that enduring a lot eventually makes you emotionally numb. They expect detachment, coldness, or a blunt absence of feeling. What surprises them is how deeply you still feel everything. You can tolerate distress without it destroying your daily functioning. Yet the pain still arrives, vivid, specific, and privately exhausting. This contradiction is rarely acknowledged out loud. Psychology refers to this as distress tolerance paired with psychological resilience, not the absence of pain, but the capacity to carry it without collapse. You don't shut emotions down, you compartmentalize them carefully. You cry in controlled windows, grieve between responsibilities, and then continue. Not because you're healed, but because stopping never felt like an option. This endurance often gets mistaken for health. For some, it becomes a strength, for others a quiet burden. High tolerance doesn't automatically mean emotional safety or resolution. It simply means you've learned how much you can survive. And you may still be discovering where endurance ends and care begins. 3. Heightened emotional perception. You notice shifts before words change or voices raise. A pause lasts half a second longer, and your body registers it. You read emotional weather the way others read headlines. People call it intuition, or empathy, or being overly sensitive. But this sensitivity didn't come from nowhere. It was learned through pattern and consequence. Psychology names this effective empathy and emotional attunement, an increased awareness of emotional cues tied to safety prediction. You learned to sense danger before it announced itself. Now, micro-minus expressions feel loud, and silence feels full. You adjust your responses quickly, often without conscious thought. This helps you avoid conflict, but it also keeps you vigilant. Not everyone with high empathy developed it through pain, and not all emotional attunement is a wound. But for you, awareness once reduced risk. You might still be asking whether this sensitivity protects you or keeps you exposed. 4. Growth after psychological rupture. People often imagine growth as something gradual and intentional, a steady improvement, guided choices, supportive environment. But that wasn't how change arrived for you. Your sense of self cracked before it ever expanded. Beliefs collapsed under pressure, relationships reorganized without permission. Meaning didn't evolve, it had to be rebuilt from fragments. Psychology names this post-minus dramatic growth and meaning reconstruction. Not improvement after pain, but reorientation because the old map failed. You didn't grow because suffering was valuable. You grew because previous explanations stopped working. What mattered shifted, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. You began choosing depth over appearance, truth over comfort. This growth doesn't feel triumphant or inspirational. It feels sober, precise, and occasionally lonely. Not everyone who breaks reorganizes in this way. You may still wonder whether this growth belongs to you or to necessity. 5. Permanent alert and self-minus-minimizimitan. Even in calm spaces, part of you stays awake. Your body tracks tone changes, timing shifts, emotional undercurrents. Relaxation feels temporary, conditional, almost negotiable. People assume alertness means anxiety or mistrust. But this vigilance formed when awareness prevented damage. It became automatic long before it became exhausting. Psychology calls this hypervigilance paired with self-minus-silencing. You stay alert while downplaying your own discomfort. Your needs feel less urgent than maintaining stability. You say it's fine faster than checking whether it is. You minimize your pain before anyone else has the chance. Not because it's small, but because it feels inconvenient. Some people develop vigilance and still demand care. Others, like you, learn it to disappear slightly. Neither response is universal or fixed. You may be carrying more than you allow yourself to name. 6. Attachment control paradox. You crave closeness, but only if it feels predictable. You want intimacy, but without emotional volatility. Connection matters, yet control feels safer. Others might call this inconsistency or guardedness. But inside, it feels like negotiation, not contradiction. You want to attach without losing stability. Psychology refers to this as attachment ambivalence and control illusion. I push toward connection paired with fear of emotional loss. Control becomes a substitute for safety. You manage expectations, pace vulnerability, and monitor attachment carefully, not to manipulate, but to reduce uncertainty. Letting go completely once came with consequences. Some people seek control for power. Others seek it for emotional survival. The difference is subtle, but significant. You may still be learning whether closeness requires as much control as it once did. People who have gone through too much are often misread from the outside. Strength gets confused with ease, awareness with suspicion, calm with detachment. What looks composed is often carefully balanced. Culturally, we celebrate resilience without examining its cost. We praise endurance, but rush past the systems that demanded it. Survival becomes a personality instead of a response. Here's the quiet truth. Adaptation keeps you alive, but it also shapes who you become. Beyond trauma, beyond coping, this becomes a question of identity. Who are you when vigilance loosens? When survival is no longer required? What parts remain when protection is optional? If these questions resonate, you're not alone in asking them. Stay with this channel, not for answers, but for shared reflection.